Cressida stood at the edge of the glittering ballroom, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that her fingers ached. She was the Duchess of Ashworth, wife of the powerful Duke Lucian Ashworth, yet she had never felt more invisible. Her husband stood across the room, his broad back turned to her, deep in conversation with a cluster of gentlemen. He had not glanced her way once that entire evening. Whispers brushed against her ears like thorns. Such a pity, she tries so hard. He never even walks with her. They say he only married her to save her from ruin. Cressida kept her practiced smile in place, but deep inside, a fragile hope cracked silently. She had worn his favorite shade of blue. She had arranged her hair the way his mother once remarked he admired. She had stood where he could easily see her if he chose to. But Lucian Ashworth chose nothing when it came to his wife. He simply existed in the same world, a cold and distant figure, never close enough to touch. Cressida had been married to him for 2 years, and still she felt like a ghost in his grand manner. The evening wore on. A waltz began. Cressida watched as other couples moved to the floor, the ladies' gowns swirling like flowers in a gentle breeze. She loved dancing, but the Duke never asked her. She could not recall the last time they had shared a dance. Her heart squeezed, but she drew a steadying breath and reminded herself of her role. She was a duchess now. Dignity was her only shield. A familiar voice slid beside her, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Still waiting, Your Grace." Lady Helena Pemberton smiled with poisonous sweetness. She was the woman society had long expected Lucian to marry before he shocked everyone by choosing a bride with a ruined reputation. "I suppose some things never change," Helena added, her eyes glinting. "He truly does forget you exist." Cressida's nails bit into her palm, but she held her composure. "The Duke is occupied, as always. I am quite content to observe." "Content?" Helena let the word hang in the air, dripping with mockery. "How admirable! If I had a husband who never looked at me, I would simply cease to be anywhere near him. But you linger like a hopeful shadow." She laughed softly and drifted away, leaving Cressida rooted to the spot, her cheeks burning despite the cool air. Something inside Cressida snapped that night. Not loudly, not visibly. It was a quiet, internal surrender. She looked across the room at the man she had loved from the very first moment she saw him, years before the scandal, before the broken engagement, before the cold proposal that had felt like both salvation and a sentence. She had loved him with a young girl's fervent heart. When he had come to her father's house and offered marriage, she had believed it was destiny. She had imagined he had seen her, truly seen her and wanted her. But the wedding night had brought nothing but polite distance. The weeks after had turned into a silent, lonely routine. He was never cruel, never harsh. He was simply absent while standing right beside her. Cressida watched Lucian laugh at something an old earl said. His rare smile, the one she had once dreamed of earning, was directed at everyone but her. She realized then that she had been waiting for a love that would never come. She had spent 2 years shrinking herself, twisting into shapes she thought he might finally notice. She had been a fool. That was the moment Cressida Ashworth stopped hopping. She turned and walked out of the ballroom without a backward glance. She did not see the Duke's head turn just as she disappeared through the terrace doors, a faint frown creasing his brow before he returned his attention to his companions. The days that followed were different. Cressida did not weep into her pillow or rage at the silent walls of Ashworth Manor. Instead, she rose each morning and did something she had not allowed herself before. She filled her hours with purpose that had nothing to do with her husband. She visited the tenant cottages, asked after the sick, and listened to the farmers' worries about the coming harvest. She discovered a neglected wing of the manor that housed an old library, filled with books on botany and medicine. Her curious mind, starved for so long, devoured them. She also found the village. Ashworth Village sat just beyond the manor gates, a cluster of stone houses and a small chapel. Its people had seen little of their duchess, and at first they were wary. But Cressida came without ceremony, her hands willing to help, her voice gentle. She began spending mornings at the small clinic run by a physician who served the poor. Dr. Julian Whitmore was a man of quiet competence. He had kind eyes the color of autumn leaves, and he never looked at her with pity or judgment. The first time she entered his clinic, he simply handed her a basket of bandages to roll and said, "There's always more work than hands. Welcome, Your Grace." Cressida found a strange peace there. Julian treated her not as a neglected wife but as a person of value. He discussed medical texts with her, challenged her opinions, and made her laugh, a sound she had almost forgotten. She knew it was improper for a duchess to spend so much time with a country physician, but she no longer cared. Society already whispered about her. Let them whisper. For the first time in years, she felt her own heartbeat, not someone else. At Ashworth Manor, Lucian noticed the change gradually. At first it was small things. His wife no longer waited for him in the drawing room after dinner. She no longer left fresh flowers on his study desk, a small gesture she had done every week since their marriage. When he passed her in the corridor, she curtsied politely, murmured "good morning," and continued on her way without the hopeful pause that used to beg for his attention. It unsettled him, though he refused to name the feeling. One evening, he returned from a long ride to find the house unusually quiet. His steward mentioned that Her Grace was still at the village clinic and would dine separately upon her return. Lucian stood in the empty dining room, staring at the single-place setting meant for him, and felt an unfamiliar twist of irritation. She had never missed dinner before. She had always been there, a quiet presence at the far end of the long table. He pushed the irritation aside. It was better this way, he told himself. She was finding her own pursuits. He should be relieved. The marriage was an arrangement, nothing more. He had made that clear on their wedding night when she had looked up at him with those hopeful eyes and he had turned away, afraid of the very thing she offered. But the manor felt colder. Weeks passed. Cressida's work at the clinic deepened. She helped Julian organize a fund for widowed mothers and taught several children their letters in the church hall. The villagers began to greet her warmly, and the sound of her laughter occasionally drifted through open windows. Julian often walked her back to the manor gates at dusk, their heads bent together in easy conversation. The rumors reached Lucian through his steward first, then through Lady Helena, who made a special visit to Ashworth Manor under the guise of tea. "Your Duchess is becoming quite the saint among the common folk," Helena remarked, stirring her tea with delicate malice. "Though one wonders if her devotion lies with the poor or with the handsome doctor who never leaves her side." She let the words settle like poison. "I only mention it because people are talking, Lucian. It reflects poorly on your name." Lucian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained ice. "My wife's charitable work honors this house. I will not hear it maligned." He dismissed her shortly after, but the seed of disquiet had been planted. That afternoon he found himself riding toward the village. He told himself it was to inspect the mill, but his horse carried him directly to the clinic. Through the window he saw them. Cressida was laughing, her head tilted back, a strand of hair escaping her simple bun. Julian Whitmore stood close, handing her a cup of water, his gaze warm and far too familiar. Something dark and jagged twisted in Lucian's chest. He recognized the emotion immediately, though he had not felt it in years. Jealousy. Hot, irrational, and thoroughly unwanted. He did not enter. He turned his horse and rode away, his heart pounding against his ribs. That evening he waited for her in the library. She came in late, her cheeks flushed from the walk, and stopped short when she saw him. "Your Grace," she said, surprised. "I did not expect you to still be awake." "We need to speak." His voice was harder than he intended. He watched her expression shift from surprise to guarded calm. The hope that used to leap into her eyes was gone. He felt its absence like a blow. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting down her shawl. "Your association with the physician is becoming the subject of gossip. I trust you understand the impropriety." Cressida's chin lifted a fraction. "Dr. Whitmore is a good man who serves this community. I have done nothing improper, nor would I if people gossip. That is their burden, not mine." Lucian took a step closer, his restraint fraying. "I am your husband. It is my name you carry. I will not have it tarnished." A bitter smile touched her lips, one he had never seen before. "Your name," she repeated softly. "For 2 years I have been your duchess in title alone. I have waited in empty rooms. I have smiled through public indifference. I have been invisible in your house. And now, because I found a purpose that does not revolve around your neglect, you suddenly remember I exist." The words landed like stones in still water. Lucien stared at her, his carefully constructed walls trembling. He had never heard her speak so plainly. The quiet, hopeful woman he had married was now standing before him like a stranger, calm and unafraid. "I have never neglected you," he said, but even to his own ears it sounded hollow. "You have never seen me," she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I have grown tired of hopping you wood." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the dim library with the echo of her words ringing in the silence. Sleep did not come easily to Lucien Ashworth that night. He paced his chambers, her face haunting him. He remembered her as she was on their wedding day, nervous and radiant, her eyes full of unspoken affection. He remembered how he had deliberately kept his distance, terrified of feeling anything after the humiliation Arabella had dealt him years ago. Arabella had chosen wealth over love, had made him feel like a fool for offering his heart. He had sworn never to be so vulnerable again. When he agreed to marry Cressida, it was to fulfill duty and silence society's demands. He never intended to care. But now, the thought of losing her, not just physically but emotionally, filled him with a panic he could not suppress. The following days were a study in quiet agony. Cressida continued her work, her manner toward him perfectly civil but entirely devoid of warmth. She no longer sought his company. She no longer paused outside his study. She had built a life within his house that did not include him, and the more she pulled away, the more desperately he wanted to pull her back. He began to watch her, not with suspicion but with a hungry, aching need to understand. He noticed the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear, the way she hummed softly when she read, the way the children in the village ran to her as if she were their safe harbor. She was not just beautiful, she was good in a way he had refused to acknowledge. One afternoon, driven by a restless torment, he entered the small sitting room that had once been her private refuge. He had never stepped foot in it before. The room smelled faintly of lavender. On a small writing desk, tucked beneath a stack of letters, he found a leather-bound journal. He knew he should not open it, but the desperate need to know her, to understand the heart he had ignored, overpowered his honor. He opened the journal and read. The first entry was dated the week of their engagement. Her handwriting was careful and hopeful. "Today he looked at me and I forgot how to breathe. I know this marriage is a duty to him, but I cannot help dreaming. I have loved Lucien Ashworth since I was 17, when he smiled at me across a garden party and I thought the sun had fallen to earth. I will be a good wife. Perhaps, in time, he will see me." Lucien's throat tightened. He turned the pages. Months of entries followed, each one a blade. "He did not come to dinner. I waited 3 hours. I am still waiting. I wore the blue gown today. He did not notice. He called me Your Grace instead of my name. I am not Cressida to him. I am only a title. I think perhaps I am not the kind of woman a man could love." He had to stop several times, his vision blurring. He read how her hope had slowly withered, how she had cried alone on their first anniversary when he forgot entirely and spent the day in London. And then a recent entry, written only a week ago. "I no longer wait. The dream is dead. I am learning to live without it. Julian says I have a gift for healing. He sees me as a person, not a shadow. I think I might finally breathe again." The journal slipped from his fingers. He stood in the silent room, his chest heaving as if he had run a great distance. He had done this. He had taken a woman who loved him with such fierce, pure devotion, and had starved her heart until she was forced to let it go. He had been so afraid of his own wounds that he had bled onto her without ever noticing. He left the journal where he found it, but he could not leave the truth behind. That evening, a storm rolled over the valley. Cressida had not returned from the clinic by nightfall, and the rain began to hammer the windows with violent force. Lucian's unease grew with every passing minute. He sent word to the village, but the road was treacherous. Without a second thought, he threw on his greatcoat, mounted his horse, and rode into the darkness. The path to the village was barely visible. Mud sucked at the horse's hooves. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief flashes he saw the clinic ahead. He burst through the door, drenched and wild-eyed. Cressida stood by a cot, pressing a cloth to a child's fevered forehead. Julian was beside her, equally absorbed. When she looked up and saw her husband, her eyes widened in shock. "Lucian," she breathed, forgetting formality in her surprise. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, uncaring of the wet coat or the watching eyes. "I thought you were hurt," he rasped, his voice breaking in a way he could not control. "The storm, you did not come home. I could not bear it. I could not lose you." Cressida stood frozen for a heartbeat, then slowly her arms came up and rested against his chest, not quite pushing him away. "I am safe," she said quietly. "The child needed care. I would have stayed the night." Lucian pulled back just enough to look at her face. Her expression was guarded but not cold. "I read your journal," he confessed, his voice raw. "I know what I have done. I know I have been a fool. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I am begging you, Cressida, do not leave me. Not in your heart. I cannot bear this distance any longer." Her lips parted, but she did not speak. Julian quietly excused himself, giving them the room's privacy. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different tempest swirled. "You loved me," Lucian continued, his thumb brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "You loved me, and I threw it away because I was a coward. Arabella broke my pride, not my heart. I see that now. I was too proud to admit I wanted you from the moment I first saw you at that garden party, long before any scandal. But I told myself I was marrying out of duty. I lied to myself, and I punished you for my own fear." Cressida's eyes shimmered. "You saw me then, before everything." "I saw you," he said, his voice thick. "You wore a yellow dress and you laughed at something a sparrow did on the fountain. I thought you were the loveliest creature I had ever beheld. But I was afraid. I thought I could never deserve such light. So I locked myself in shadow and dragged you there with me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I thought you were still in love with someone else. I found an old letter from Arabella in your study once, and I believed your heart was buried with that past." Lucian shook his head vehemently. "I burned every letter she ever wrote me the night before our wedding. I kept nothing of hers. That letter you found was one I had forgotten, tucked in an old book. It meant nothing. You meant everything, but I was too broken to show it." He took her hands, his strong fingers trembling. "I do not ask you to love me again overnight, but let me try. Let me earn back what I so carelessly lost. I will wait. I will do whatever it takes. Only, do not look at another man the way you once looked at me." Cressida's composure shattered. She had been so strong for so long, but the sight of this proud, cold man brought low by his own regret undid her. She did not fall into his arms. She was not yet ready, but she did not pull away. She let him hold her hands in the dim lamplight while the storm wept against the glass. "I have spent 2 years learning to live without your love," she whispered. "It nearly destroyed me. I cannot open that door so easily, Lucian. My heart is not as resilient as you might think." "Then I will knock gently," he said, his voice breaking. "I will knock until you decide to open it, even if it takes a lifetime." The days that followed were a delicate, fragile dance. Lucian did not push. He did not demand. He simply began to be present. He joined her at the clinic, not out of jealousy, but because he wanted to see her world. He met Julian, and after a stiff and difficult conversation, managed to thank him for his care of the village and of his wife. Julian, a man of grace, accepted with a knowing smile and a quiet warning. "Do not hurt her again. She has endured enough." Lucian felt the weight of those words. He deserved them. He began to learn his wife anew. He discovered her favorite books, her love of honey on fresh bread, her habit of singing softly to herself when she thought no one listened. He left small tokens, a sprig of lavender on her pillow, a new volume of poetry on her desk, without demanding thanks. And slowly, so slowly it felt like the thaw of a frozen river, Cressida began to look at him without the armor of self-protection. One evening, as they walked through the manor gardens, the sunset painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, she stopped and turned to him. "There is something I must tell you," she said. "I discovered a letter from my father among your papers some weeks ago. He was thanking you for paying his debts, for securing my brother's education. You never told me." Lucian's expression flickered with surprise. "It was my duty to your family. I did not want you to feel indebted." "It was not duty," she said softly. "It was kindness, hidden kindness." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You are not the cold man you pretend to be, Lucian. You are afraid just like me." He reached up and cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Terrified of losing you again. I love you, Cressida. I loved you too late, but I love you with everything I am." The words hung in the air, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then Cressida smiled, a real tender smile that reached her eyes. "You did not love me too late," she said. "I just needed time to believe it." He kissed her then, as the last light of the sun wrapped around them. It was not a kiss of desperate passion, but of profound, trembling relief. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through years of loneliness and finally found each other in the same place. In the weeks that followed, the whispers in society changed. They no longer spoke of the Duke's neglected wife. They spoke of the Duchess who had transformed the village, and the Duke who never left her side. They saw Lucian Ashworth escort his wife into ballrooms with his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, his eyes following her with a warmth that had never been there before. They saw Cressida laugh freely, her hand often tucked into her husband's arm. And in the quiet moments when the world fell away, they built a new life together. He taught her to ride his favorite stallion. She taught him to sit still and listen to the music of a stream. They planted a garden behind the manor, a wild, beautiful thing where roses climbed old stone walls and lavender bloomed in unruly abundance. One evening, as they sat on a bench watching the stars emerge, Cressida leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was so close to giving up," she murmured. "If you had waited any longer, I think my heart would have been too far gone." Lucian pressed his lips to her hair. "And I would have spent the rest of my life chasing the ghost of what I destroyed. You saved me, Cressida, even when I did not deserve it." She lifted her head and looked at him, her eyes filled with a peace that had been hard-won. "We saved each other," she said. He took her hand and laced their fingers together. In the distance, the manor windows glowed with welcoming light. The future stretched before them, no longer empty, no longer cold. It was filled with the quiet, steady beat of two hearts that had learned, through pain and patience, how to beat as one. And in the end, that was all they ever needed.